In Vienna, the stage is set for an international peace conference where world diplomats gather in search of dialogue over division.
Welcome, everyone. We gather today at a critical juncture with the eyes of the world upon us.
Thank you all for attending. My name is Oliver Lucas, and I will be moderating today's conference as we work to find a path toward resolving the conflict in Ukraine.
My first guest is Russian diplomat Alexander Lyarov. He has been a strong and outspoken voice in representing Russia's position in global discussions.
I'm glad to be here, and I hope we can have an open and constructive dialogue today.
Thank you, Mr. Lyarov. Now I would like to introduce our next guest, British diplomat Arthur Blake, a respected voice in international diplomacy.
Thank you, Oliver. I look forward to an honest and constructive discussion.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let us begin. Mr. Lyarov, how do you respond to those who say Russia's actions in Ukraine have violated international law?
Russia rejects those accusations. We are protecting our security and our people, and we will not be lectured by the West.
So you're claiming you haven't violated international law, despite 141 countries condemning your invasion?
Mr. Blake conveniently forgets that 4 great countries in the United Nations supported our invasion. Our actions in Ukraine.
And Mr. Lyarov, would you kindly tell the audience who these 4 great countries are that supported your invasion?
I don't have to answer your questions. I'm not on trial, and this isn't your courtroom.
Well, Mr. Lyarov, this is a conference, and you did bring up the 4 countries. Would you please tell us who they are?
Very well. The 4 countries who supported our actions were North Korea, Syria, Belarus, and Eritrea.
Yes, those are all dictatorships with the worst human rights records on the planet. I don't think that's anything to brag about.
Well, those countries are our friends. They've had some human rights issues in the past, but they're improving.
Improving? They don't even have freedom of speech or a free press, no right to a fair trial, and North Korea is practically one giant prison you can't escape from.
Although, I suppose from Russia's perspective, human rights aren't exactly a priority.
I resent that comment. Russia has the best human rights in the world.
All right, gentlemen, let's change topics. How do you see us finally achieving peace in Ukraine? Mr. Lyarov, let's begin with you.
Russia has already done everything humanly possible to achieve peace. We have tried everything we can think of.
Here's an idea. How about leaving Ukraine, as the United Nations has already told you to do multiple times?
The United Nations is controlled by the United States, and we don't take orders from them.
That is completely absurd, and you've just insulted the 141 independent countries that voted to condemn your invasion. Mr. Lyarov, please refrain from making wild and insulting accusations about independent countries in the United Nations. Nobody controls their votes.
Anyhow, we are not leaving Ukraine, because the people of those 5 oblasts voted overwhelmingly to join Russia. It is now our rightful territory.
I'm sorry, but are you referring to those absurdly fake referendums that were condemned by almost the entire world?
I'm talking about the fact that 87 to 99% of the people in those territories voted to join Russia. They were legitimate elections, and we have videos of people voting.
Mr. Lyarov, please, do you really think we're all idiots? Look, do you mind if I ask you a few questions about these so-called referendums?
These referendums were real and monitored by observers. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Just to clarify, is the main basis for Russia's claim to these territories those so-called referendums?
Yes. Those referendums give Russia the basis for our claims to the 5 territories.
So if it were proven that those referendums were fake, would that delegitimize Russia's claims to any of the 5 territories?
Yes, I suppose so, but it doesn't matter, because I know those referendums were legitimate and real.
Is it true that the only so-called observers at these referendums were just a handful of Russian or openly pro-Russian individuals who wanted Russia to win?
Well, we have found that the only election observers we can trust are either Russian or pro-Russian. All others cannot be trusted. So, Mr. Lyarov, you've just admitted there were no independent, legitimate election observers for these referendums.
Mr. Liarov, just a few years before these referendums, Ukraine's president won an election in a landslide. Now you claim up to 99% want to join Russia. Do you see why that's hard to believe?
Well, sometimes voters are fickle. The main thing is that they later voted to join Russia.
Or so you say. Mr. Liarov, aside from Kremlin-backed officials or their allies, was any credible Ukrainian or independent government involved in organizing these referendums?
For matters this important, we only trust the Kremlin and our closest allies to organize the referendums.
So, Mr. Liarov, you're admitting the Kremlin entered another country and ran these so-called referendums without its consent, participation, or independent oversight?
We didn't need their consent. We already felt that they would vote for Russia, and the Kremlin did what it thought was best.
Mr. Liarov, you have just admitted that the Kremlin entered a sovereign country without its consent and held referendums there. That is a clear violation of international law.
Well, we don't agree.
Mr. Liarov, was there any independent auditing of these votes, or did only Kremlin-backed people count them?
We only trust our allies to count the votes.
Can we see the voting records or any raw data for these votes?
After the votes were counted, all records remain sealed and unpublished. They aren't available for public review.
So no proof, no records, no oversight, just the Kremlin's word that 99% voted for Russia? Do you realize how absurd that sounds?
Mr. Liarov, these are serious concerns. Without records or independent oversight, how can anyone outside the Kremlin accept these results as credible?
This is typical Western hypocrisy. Whenever Russia holds a vote, you call it fake. You just can't stand that the people voted to become Russian.
Residents of Kherson greeted Ukrainian troops with cheering, flowers and flags after being liberated. How does that square with your claim that 87% willingly voted to join Russia?
Mr. Liarov, what Mr. Blake just said is clear proof that your referendum in Kherson was a sham. And if Kherson was faked, then perhaps all of your so-called referendums were.
That is absurd. Kherson voted freely. These claims of fraud are just Western propaganda.
Every step of these referendums was controlled entirely by the Kremlin, which is one reason why the United Nations formally condemned them. So much is wrong with these so-called referendums, they insult people's intelligence, because only an idiot would think they have any validity.
Gentlemen, this discussion has made one thing abundantly clear. These so-called referendums lack any legitimacy. The world sees them for what they are. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you to our audience for joining us. This session is concluded. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks for watching. This is Ironic Bites, where truth meets irony. Subscribe now and join us in exposing the absurd.